Hey guys, what is happening? Welcome back, finally, to The Drip.
Yeah, it took a little unannounced hiatus at the end of the year. Got pretty busy, but we're back now.
We're back.
And today we're going to be talking about something, well, in general related to our church, but also just churches in general, and that's a little bit of ecclesiology. Why do we operate here at our church with elders, and what's the biblical basis for that? So, what are the biblical leaders that are listed for us, and then a little bit about why we're actually considered Baptist, what makes us a Baptist church.
Yeah.
And talk about that a little bit.
Super fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the ecclesia, right, the church that's listed in the Bible, we would say the theology of that. So we would say ecclesiology. So this is one tiny little facet of ecclesiology. What do you really believe the Bible teaches how a church should operate and function? So today, on The Drip, we're going to talk about the Baptist directive for ecclesiology in relation to leadership. Exciting.
Yeah.
I'm Anthony Patton.
And I'm Coby Schaefer.
And this is The Drip. So, ecclesiology, Baptist directive for leadership. What do you got?
Yeah. Well, I think, not to dive too far into, church history and all the denominations and things like that, but I think we have to understand a little bit like why the Baptist, name, why the Baptist church is even a thing. And really it goes, as you look at the history, people can go and look this up online. It's very common knowledge, but if you go back in the history, you see it's a product of the Protestant Reformation, like we would say pretty much all the denominations are nowadays. And in particular, it's actually interesting because the Baptists actually came from the Anabaptists, which kind of implies that they don't baptize, just by the wording of the name. And really what that means is they didn't baptize infants.
They're not anti-Baptist.
Right, they're not anti-Baptist, it's Anna, as in they don't baptize infants. And so really that's one of the core things about the Baptist church is there's this thing called believer's baptism. So instead of baptizing infants into the new covenant, very much like circumcision acted as a sign of the old covenant, those churches that partake of infant baptism generally would say it's a sign of the new covenant. Baptist churches say, no, we're going to baptize those who have professed to know Christ, because that's really the biblical directive that they see, or at least they use for the justification of that. So that's one aspect of it.
Prior and post-Reformation, you have Catholic Church who is baptizing for the removal of original sin and the impartation of the Holy Spirit. Right. So like a Presbyterian movement would be slightly different. They're going to baptize new sign of a new covenant. I think there's some important distinguishes there, because I would consider, though not trying to bash them, but I would consider the Catholic directive to remove but the infant baptism to remove the original sin is not something we found taught in the Bible. Where, if you get a guy like John MacArthur or R.C. Sproul, who their whole entire theological careers kind of debated heavily between the difference between what they call pedo or credo baptism, baptizing infants, or just believer's baptism. So, again, that's one of our core underpinning directives to be a Baptist. We believe in credo baptism. Baptizing of professioned and confessional believers. Only.
Yeah, only. Yeah. And that's,
And full submersion.
And full immersion, not
because the
not
word
sprinkling.
Baptism, to submerse.
To
right?
submerse,
So we just say, well, that's what the Bible says, so that's what we're going to do.
Dunk them.
Yeah, that's sprinkling.
Yeah, no, none of that here. So the other, at least it's coffee.
Yeah.
That's holy
Can
water.
we do like a dumping?
Oh.
That is holy water.
It's interesting. I watched this video one time.
Baptist holy water.
Of this guy who, it was a Baptist church, full immersion, that's what they believe in.
Okay.
But there was this one guy, and because of a disability that he had, like he could not be either removed from like his wheelchair or something like that, and so.
Did they like ice bucket challenge him?
No, but they sprinkled him, and I'm pretty sure they went through and explained like, hey, this is why we're sprinkling him, and it was, I think, a very, very interesting, a very, kind of nuanced thing, like, and I think that goes to show, you could take the Baptists and the Presbyterians who believe different things about this, and there's not supposed to be animosity towards one another. It's, you have your own biblical justification for this view, we have our own biblical justification for this view, and we're not going to argue over these things because ultimately baptism should be as a result of obedience to Christ. And so it's, it's not regarding our salvation or things like that. And so there should be some semblance of unity on that, even if we disagree in those matters. But I thought that was super interesting. I've never seen that before, but I thought it was just really cool to see, how they went about it, and that's a challenging thing. Like, you're a Baptist church.
Baptism doesn't save.
Yeah.
So yes, we're going to try to do the best we can to honor the Lord, but where health and physical ability permit.
Literally wasn't possible
Yeah.
to fully immerse. So
same thing kind of within the prison system. There's some prisons that don't allow us to baptize with inside. So, somebody comes to Christ, we just can't. We're just by the state not allowed to baptize them. So we just can't.
Do your best to honor the Lord in it.
Yeah. So I don't know. We've never really even discussed like sprinkling or something like that in the prison, but we just we do the best we can to live out what He's commanded us to do.
Yeah.
So and like exactly, I think you're in the same boat as I am. We don't view this as a divisive, like we're going to separate over these kind of things. Now, if you believe in pedo baptism, you might be better suited going to like a Presbyterian church or maybe a conservative Methodist church, something like that, which would still do that. But if you do not, and you study the Bible and believe in credo baptism, a Baptist church might be, or generally non-denominational churches, they're going to be more credo baptism in nature. So it doesn't mean you can't go fellowship and worship at a church that believes differently, because this is not a salvatory issue. Sign of the new covenant or an outward sign of an inward change would be kind of the difference between Baptist and Presbyterian. So, but that's one facet of being a Baptist, right? Out of the very few directives to be a Baptist, one of them is you believe in believers or credo baptism by full submersion, which is just as Romans 6 says, we're buried with Jesus by baptism unto death, raised to walk in newness of life. It's an outward sign of an inward change that's already happened between me and Christ. So that's it.
Yeah.
Super easy.
Yeah. It's not debatable or
not at all.
Anything like
that. But even if you take it back to the Reformation, you have people who will kind of stand by, well, the Baptist Church has always existed, which I think is a historical stretch. You have the Catholic Church, and then in the Great Schism you have the Orthodox Church that comes out of that. But you don't really see a Baptist movement until England, and then you don't really see Baptist being like a prevalent theological like standpoint for the church really until America in the 1600s. That's in Rhode Island when that movement really like takes roots. It's an Anabaptist movement, but the true like Baptist movement we see in America, 1600s, Rhode Island.
Yeah, and that was primarily right. They wanted to have kind of their own, kind of more of a decentralized, governance for the church. Whereas like the Presbyterian Church and generally those other denominations, they're going to have like one overarching, governing body for them that makes the decisions for them about how they operate and things like that. And even you've got Westminster Presbyterian and other. That's just one example I can think of.
You have the bishop that bumps all the way up to like the Archbishop of Canterbury, or you have like local priests that bump all the way up to like the Pope, right? So you have a decentralized church ecclesiology, like the governing system for church. In the Baptist movement, especially with everything going on in England and the Church of England, a whole hot mess. It's a big reason, right? We wanted to come and have freedom of religious worship. Well, out of that sprang a massive independent movement that a local body should be autonomous in its governance. So a local body handles its own religious authority only in relation to Jesus Christ. And so the Baptist movement is very much built on that. We do not go to a denominational oversight that commands the theology and doctrine of the church. We go to the Bible, and therefore Christ being the Bible would use the word kephale, the head. He is our head within the local church, not somebody else externally from the church that's a head. Right.
And that's why sometimes we don't even say that the Baptist is really a denomination, because it's less so a denomination, it's more of a collection of churches. So especially as we talk about like the Southern Baptist Convention, who we're members of and things like that, it's not a denomination, it's a group of like-minded churches. So a little difference there.
Collection of like-minded churches partnering, it has to be like-minded, right? Collection of like-minded churches partnering together for missions. Now you do have like a denomination in the Baptist movement, like the American Baptist movement. They would have some denominational oversight, but that's generally not the case for Baptists. SBC is, there's no denominational oversight. The Free Will Baptists are going to be non-denominational the American Baptist movement would be slightly different, but even less so than like the Methodist Church, that they're going to move in and out their pastor. You don't see that in the American Baptist. They might help to appoint a pastor, but that's an election happening within. So even with a denomination for an American Baptist, it's still less so than some of these other mainstream denominations you see. So more still centralized or localized church governance, which is what we're talking about today, right?
Yeah.
It's why do we, and what do we see in the Bible? Does it really set up in order for like a system like with bishops or with the Pope, that system that's in order, that somebody's in charge and it trickles down all the way to the local church?
Right.
Or does the local church function and have action autonomously?
Yeah. So we've got that working, amidst most of the Baptist, not all, but many of the Baptist churches. They're very independent in that sense, right? They govern themselves. And we've got believers baptism versus, credo baptism versus pedo baptism. And what's the other kind of directive that, kind of makes a Baptist church a Baptist church?
Communion would be probably the third thing that would be, so you have local church governance, full credo and submersion baptism, and then you have remembrance communion, not transubstantiation or consubstantiation communion, which we can get into those a different time.
I think we've already done a video on transubstantiation.
So go watch that one, and maybe consubstantiation we'll cover a different time.
Yep.
But that merely when Jesus says, and Paul affirms in the New Testament, as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, do this in remembrance of me. So it's not the literal body and blood of Jesus Christ, and he's not spiritually present in an impartation of the Spirit in a different way or in excess in the taking of communion. It's merely, as often as we do this together as a body, we do this in remembrance. So it's just remembrance communion that we take. So, and there's a lot of other little things to be a Baptist that you could say that have kind of like little things that are branched off of that, but those are your really three, if you're like, I'm a Baptist, those are really three main core beliefs that you pretty much have to ascribe to call yourself a Baptist. So local congregational governance is what they call it. So congregational governance, remembrance communion, and full credo submersion baptism. And then you could say, well, I'm a Baptist. Now I could probably go and find the vast majority of non-denominational churches in America that would say, like, I believe the same thing. So obviously there's some things they think that they need to maybe divide over as far as just the local church goes. But even some local non-denominational churches I talk to, when I tell them, we self-govern internally and we really just hold to and believe in these three core doctrines that would make us Baptist, most people are shocked. They don't, they think the Baptist in relation to like a national denomination with a lot of strings attached, and it's just not the case. Especially within the SBC. So very local is all doctrine, theology, and church governance handled.
I think it's kind of interesting too. There's kind of a joke that, if you're talking to a non-denominational church, you're talking to them, they're like, oh, we're non-denominational. Okay, so Baptist, because essentially most most non-denominational churches believe in believers' baptism, remembrance communion, and they generally have local autonomy. So it's like, so Baptist, basically. But, they just, for whatever reason, it's, and that's fine. Like, it's kind of a joke. Like, oh, you're a non-denominational church? Okay, so you're a Baptist. Like, because it really kind of only comes down to those two and maybe three things. I suppose the local autonomy doesn't have to be there, but in general, it's the baptism and remembrance. But most
one of the
Baptist
main
churches,
directives for a Baptist church. Now, you could say, like, well, that's partially like the American Baptist movement. It's partially degraded there, but it still holds pretty true. So you might have the same thing that happens if like a church plants a lot of other churches and has sub-campuses. They might operate the same way. Like, hey, if you want to still be called a sub-camp, like right down south from us, you have a church called Grace Church, maybe like 45 minutes to an hour south of us. They have a ton of campuses all around the Hudson Valley and like this whole surrounding area. And that would be kind of the case. If you want to be a church that is one of the plants of grace, you kind of have to be like-minded in faith. So it doesn't mean that they're fully controlling the doctrine and theology in the local church setting, but you also, if you get too far away from what they believe,
they can't vary too far.
Then there's going to be a separation that happens there. So hopefully that would be amicable if it were to ever get that road. But it's similarly to how the American Baptist movement or the SBC functions. Like, as long as we are in the documentation of bylaws literally says in close alignment. So are we in close alignment with these other churches to partner with them in missions? And if not, then we need to graciously remove ourselves.
Exactly.
and we could still be a Baptist church. We might just not be a Southern Baptist church.
Right.
So
Yeah. And then, so what do we see biblically speaking about the actual church leadership then? If it's, and even this is the case with, those who do have an overarching denomination ruling them, they're still within the local body, there's some form of governance. But, what does that look like for us, and why, what's the biblical backing for that?
to me, it seems weird. I mean, we could go to like these big hot button passages, which we should hit on, like Titus and Timothy, that talk about actual leadership within the church. Important to hit. We can go to Acts and hit a variety of verses in Acts, but to me, two of the ones that show the most proof text that church governance happens within its local autonomous body is in Matthew 18 or in Corinthians chapter 5, where they're actually being called into church discipline, which seems like an odd place for a proof text, but Matthew 18 is saying like, hey, this is how you handle sin issues within the church.
Right.
And it means like within your local body, because he's writing to the church in Corinth, so this is how you handle a sin issue. You go with sin that you see in your brother, you go to him, and if he doesn't take what you have to say in relation to that sin, you bring back another brother from the church and you go and talk to them, and if that does not go well, then you bring it before the church.
Right.
And they don't mean the church like the entirety of the body. So we would say like Big C or Little C church. Big C is the church of Christ, which is across the world. Little C, like the local body that you're in, and that's what it says. Like bring it to your local body, and then if he still won't listen, remove him from the church.
Right.
So there's one instance where you see that the local body is acting autonomously in relation to the execution of the word and sin in someone's life.
Yeah.
And that's in 1 Corinthians 5, but also in Matthew 18, Jesus is telling them like, you have authority to do this within your local church, or the synagogue back then, or the little local house church, whatever it is. You have authority to execute sin and removing of leaven, removing of issues within your little local church. You don't have to go talk to the apostle, or go talk to whoever's leading the church in Rome, or go and find the closest bishop. Handle this locally within your local congregation. So that's just one area that I see.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Jesus, and again in the New Testament you see affirmed by Paul, that the church is called into local governance minimally in relation to sin.
Yeah.
I think there's other areas, but we just start there and say,
minimally,
I think we could all verify the church has authority locally of its own autonomous nature to regulate sin within its body, purge the evil from amongst your midst. So that's at least just one area that I would say. I mean, there's many more, but so where else? Where would you go?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think when I think about like the actual structure, or the actual like, get a group of people together, like, well, who's actually in charge, right? Who's leading that body, who's teaching that body, those sorts of things. I think we do have a pretty clear biblical directive, and it's all throughout the New Testament that you see this. But in particular, we have in Titus and Timothy, Paul either charging Timothy or to Titus, he's saying, hey, here's your qualifications for elders, here's your qualifications for deacons. And then we can see the word elder. There's actually a number of translations for that word. We would say there's elder or presbyter, or trying to think of the other ones, but there's generally what we see is you have one of those roles. Bishop, one of those roles within the different denominations. So for us here, we would say elder. A Presbyterian church, they would possibly say presbyter, and those sorts of things. But really, those are all translated into the same way. And then we also, I would say it's more of a cultural thing, but we kind of group pastor in with that as well. So at least at our church, what we say is that the term pastor and elder are synonymous, because the pastor is going to function in the role of an elder. That's what they do. They're called to teach and preach, and what we do here is we want to make sure that those pastors meet the qualifications listed for an elder. So really, and generally why I say that's cultural, it's generally you're going to denote the pastor, like we have, 5 elders here, but you and I are the only ones who are full-time, and so we would say, well, we're pastors. So there's a little bit of a differentiation there to say that our other elders, they're what we would call lay elders. They're not, they don't dedicate the entirety of their time to this. And so that's why I'd say that's more of a cultural thing, but I think we do see
when you go to a church, people expect to meet the pastor, right?
Exactly.
Who's the pastor of the church? Which to us, we would say pastor elder is the same biblically. In Titus and Timothy, it's the same position.
Yeah, exactly.
You can call it what you want, but we would be called elders.
yeah, in function, that's what we are. And so I think aside from just Paul listing the qualifications here, we do, like you already mentioned in Acts, we see that Paul and some others, as they're going around and preaching the gospel and planting churches, right? They're starting churches. We see, I think multiple times, we see that it tells us they went and they appointed elders there. And I think we see really the understanding of the elders that you kind of get when you look at the qualifications for them, especially as you're looking at Timothy and Titus. You see, well, the things that they're charged to do are to hold sound doctrine and to teach sound doctrine, right? Two things that you need in order to have not just a functioning church, but a healthy church. You can't have a church that's just anyone can stand up and say whatever they want. Like, you need someone there who's proven that they are reliable when it comes to exegeting the word, and they can confidently say, this is what the word says, right? This is what it means. You need those who are able to hold the sound doctrine and to teach it as well. And so you see that directive in what the Bible lays out for elders. And so even right here in Titus, Paul says in chapter 1 of verse 5, this is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained in order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you, if anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, and then goes into the qualifications there. So I think from a general standpoint, we would say, okay, we have this one role, and whatever term you want to use for it is fine, but in general what you have is what's recognized as the spiritual leaders of the church is going to be that role of elder or pastor, bishop, presbyter, depending on what type of a church you're in.
Yep.
But in terms of the spiritual leadership, governing the church spiritually, guiding and directing them, all under the authority, all under the head of Jesus Christ, is going to be the pastor or elder.
Yeah. Yeah, and you see some areas in the Bible that really say, like, that guy's not above reproach in relation to, like, correction. Like, so you're called to be above reproach in order to meet the qualifications, but he's not uncorrectable.
Right.
He doesn't function like a dictator within the church. He's not my way or the highway. His authority only comes by saying, thus says the Lord. This is what the Bible says, and I'm merely a vessel or a tool that God has put in this position. But my authority only comes from, so like if you are a congregant of the church, I only have authority over you by you submitting yourself to Jesus Christ.
Right.
And saying, okay, well, in this church, in this local body, Christ has appointed and positioned this pastor. And so I should submit to him in relation to the word.
Right.
And so if he is showing and has proven himself to be someone who can understand and know and exposit the word, and is going to function his life and try to help people to grow in sanctification in their lives in relation only to the word, that's where the authority comes from. So I can't just say whatever I want to say or do whatever I want to do. My authority only comes from the word and from Christ.
Yeah.
But it's like a cliche saying, but that the greatest of equals, or the number one chair in a room full of equals, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm probably butchering the exact saying, but it's we as pastors are not above anybody. It's merely positionally with the place God called us into.
Right.
And the congregation has full authority. We see that evidenced with some exceptions. There can be like, you just don't like what the word says, so now I'm going to say you're a mean, nasty person. Hebrews tells us, don't bring a charge against an elder unless on the account of 2 witnesses. So it's like, no, you shouldn't just let people go around slandering leadership for no reason, but if there's an actual sin issue in their life, it absolutely has to be addressed. In the same vein, we would address that with anybody. So,
exactly. Yeah.
we are merely shepherds within the congregation to be worshipers of Christ alongside everybody else. So, but there has to be somebody who's kind of steering or navigating or moving or guiding. Hey, we're going to go over here. As long as it's in a biblical vein, that should be supported and backed by the congregation. But as far as the Baptist directive, the congregation has the ability at any point in time to step in and say, this is not right. And we need changes. And if that individual or 2 people don't want to hear it, that gets brought before the church. And we make changes. That's a requirement to the point of removing the pastor if that's what needs to happen. So people sit in council with me all the time. They'll say things like, hey, I'm really struggling, or I don't like what the church is doing, or I don't like the direction of the church. That's still their mindset that they are in a denominational oversight where I'm the supreme ruler of the church. Like, if there's something that's biblical, biblically wrong happening within the church, it's your job to bring it to my attention and make sure it's being handled. And if I don't listen to you, you bring it to the other elders or to other people. You come and you get that handled for biblical issues. For non-biblical issues, like I don't like what color, the leadership decided to paint the walls, like, make sure that what you're going to bring forth is an actual biblical issue. And if it is, you have every authority to bring that to the leadership of the church and make sure that's handled in the same vein that you would handle it with a brother or sister in Christ. So it's another area of proof that we're not called to be above. And I don't report to some presbyter or bishop or pope. I report to Jesus Christ, and so my authority only comes through His word. That's it. So Titus and Timothy are literally being told by Paul, go into these towns. This is literally what it says. Go into these towns and find men that already meet this qualification, and then appoint them as elders. So it's not find men and try to get them to meet these qualifications. It's go and find faithful men who meet these qualifications, and it's pretty much like, so you meet the qualifications of the Bible, so you're a leader now. And so good luck.
Yay.
But, it's a high task and a high calling, a high charge, but that's what it's saying. We're not trying to, we might train up people within the church, but the early church is saying, go into these congregations and find men that will lead those local congregations in that structure, in that sense, because they meet the biblical qualifications for a leader.
Right.
Not, okay, I'll keep an eye on you. No, they already meet, now they're appointed. And it's the same thing for deacons or servants. Find people who already meet these qualifications and then appoint them to serve the church.
Yeah, and interestingly, I think it's a pretty similar thing we actually see in the Old Testament when, Moses has to go and appoint other people to essentially help him out in ruling the Israelites. It's pretty much the same thing. It's go and find those who are already qualified, right? Those who already, right? You can look at them and say, oh, they have sound wisdom, and then appoint them. Not go and, they're close and let me train them up. Like, go appoint the ones who already have shown themselves to be wise and have good counsel and love and diligently seek the Lord, and appoint those people. And so kind of a similar thing we see in the New Testament. It's find those who are already qualified and appoint them. And then same thing with deacons, like you just said. And so what's like because we've got essentially this is what we would say, right? Essentially these two leadership roles that we see within the Bible, elder and deacon.
That's it.
And so what's the difference between them?
So elder, you would say, has like ecclesiastical authority, so spiritual authority over the church. Because, all right, you can't have, say, like men, women, and children within the body of Flowing Water, like 225 to 250, something like that. Probably men, women, and children who are here. So if, say, even half of them have a different vision for where the church should go, we're going to be all over the place.
Right.
Like somebody has to take the ownership appointed by God to say, this is, I'm praying and hearing from God, this is the vision of the church, and as long as it's biblical in nature, then we follow. So often the elder or the leader of the church will be called a shepherd, which is merely like, the shepherd doesn't domineer or control or try to forcefully hurt or subjugate, right? The sheep, he's merely leading them to healthy pastures and water. To make sure that they're sustained and healthy, so they can serve the purpose they were created for, which might be meat, but no. For wool, we'll go with wool. No, but the concept of this like shepherding act of love and attention and care, but also it's the part of leadership no one likes to talk about is that's the guy who's sleeping in the doorway of the sheepfold to keep the wolves out. That's the guy who's going and checking the places to see if they're dangerous. He's the guy who's staying up all night watching the sick sheep. He's the guy who's wandering away into the wilderness in danger, trying to get that one sheep that walked away and ran away. So the aspect of leadership that everyone wants to be a leader until they're a leader, and then they don't want to be a leader because you're like the stamping block. If you're a good husband in your home, you're the stamping block for your family. You take the fall for everything that happens in your family. Church leaders should be the same way. Yes, we're casting vision and direction and guiding by the word, but also be in leadership for any length of time and you realize every issue is your issue. Every person's sin is your issue to deal with in the congregation, and their sin affects you within the church body. It hurts the body and therefore hurts you. So it's challenging to deal with, and one day you're going to have to give an account to God of how you dealt with that. So high calling, it's a high task, but that position has spiritual authority, right? We're going to say we're going to unpack as a team of elders. We're going to unpack the word and say this is what we believe sound doctrine is, and then we're going to hold to that in the local body and teach that well in the local body. So that person holds a weight of spiritual authority. The other position in the Bible would be deacon, or here in Living Water we call them servant leaders. They have qualifications just to be a servant leader. But it's merely, a deacon merely is a servant. So they don't hold spiritual authority, they don't make decisions or direction or cast vision. They merely say, this is what the elders are saying is our vision, and how can I come alongside and support that vision? Right. And that might be in a variety of topics. In Acts 6, we see that one of the servant leadership roles, one of the deacon roles, is merely to make sure that all of the widows are fed. So they're going to organize food to make sure everybody is fed well and there's not division within the church, because the Jews are being fed over the Hellenists. Let's make sure everybody is being treated fairly. And so that's one of the directives. Now the elders wanted that done. The people who are teaching and leading, they wanted that done, and they were being bogged down trying to get it done. So it was merely, hey, we're going to appoint deacons, servant leaders, to do this task so we can do what God's called us to do, which is the preaching and execution of His Word. Right.
And what I think is important about that is, I think it literally says like they're being bogged down. That's not to say like going and feeding those who can't feed themselves is a bad thing, but also as the elders, like this is what their charge is. And so if they're spending all their time doing this, which is a good thing, well, there's also this need over here. And so that's what it was. Find those who are qualified and appoint them so that they can be the ones to do this thing, so that you're making sure that, the teaching is not being, you're not being not taught, but also the needs that are there, right? The service to the body is also there. And that's obviously, as you start growing in numbers as a church, you might have one pastor, and that pastor cannot do everything. And so obviously there needs to be other people around that can do those things, and really to kind of let the pastor focus on doing his primary charge, which is to teach and to exhort and to protect the body, right? Make sure that there's no false doctrine being spread around in those things. It's very time consuming. It takes a lot of time, and to care for the needs of the body, to meet with people, to counsel them. That takes a lot of time to do that. But there's other things, and honestly most pastors, especially if you have like a small church plant, like you're going to be the one doing almost everything, and that's just not sustainable, long term. And so, you want to find those who, and really the hope here is that God's going to draw them into you as you have need for them, but you're going to find those who meet those qualifications and appoint them to do those things and let them, serve in that leadership position while you continue in that spiritual leadership position.
Yeah, in the modern church, right? This has kind of been blown up that a pastor is something different than what we really see in the Bible, right? It says literally the pastor or elder is somebody who labors over, it doesn't say 1,000 things, it labors over teaching and preaching. It's his primary directive is to teach the Word of God to other people, that in the knowing of that and submission to the Spirit in their own lives, they would walk in accordance with it. So yes, some counseling is involved in there, some one-on-one teaching, right? They're still commanded to be disciple makers, as all Christians are. But their primary directive is the teaching of God's Word. In the modern church, we could maybe do a video about this a different time to not bog it down, but a pastor is called to be 1,000 things. And it's like you're called all over the place, right? So, you're going to do hospital visits and end of life and funerals and weddings, also like private counsel for people, pre-marriage counseling for people. You then start getting called on all the crises of life, and then you have to be a drug and rehabilitation counselor on top of that, and then fast forward to people's kids being raised. The pastor now has this like weight of responsibility to make sure that not only the parents are being trained up in righteousness, but that they're equipped to then teach and train their children, which is like a requirement of pastoral care in the local church nowadays, that they would take care of other people's kids in relation to their spiritual well-being, which is just not something you see in the Bible. That's the parent's job. But the modern church has kind of turned that into the pastor's job, to make sure that there's programs and associations set up to take care of people's kids. But then on top of that, right, most modern churches have buildings, so then you're the building manager and the overseer of all those things, and then you have to be the head of the finance, make sure that the finances of the church are healthy and get budgets going, and the church is functioning, and the lights are on, and the heat's on for Sunday morning services, and you could just go on and on and on about all the teams that as a pastor you have to manage. And somebody looking in might be like, all he has to do is this one little area. But a modern 21st century pastor generally is called into 1,000 areas all over the place, and he can be bogged down very quickly.
Yeah.
I know that's the case for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to try to manage my own family.
Yeah.
Because Titus and Timothy say, if I don't, I'm not fit to lead the church.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's just a heavy burden that continues to be on our shoulders. And this is a fault of us as leaders often, is we don't in a proper manner institute deacons within the church effectively, because we're like, hey, we need an area of service. Somebody's willing, so we plug them in.
Yeah.
But there is absolutely qualifications for deacons, even servants within the Bible, and so we'll over-appoint people because we need a task done, instead of waiting for God to bring the person that would meet the qualifications and then appointing them. And it just time and again comes back to bite us. So something we're trying to work on, especially in 2025, is to make that process healthy.
Yeah.
Not only our eldership, but our servant leaders within the church healthy as well. So.
Yeah.
But those are the only two positions you see within the Bible.
Yep.
That's elders and deacons. You know, those are the two biblical words that are used, elders and deacons. That's it. That's how a church should function, with elders and deacons.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it there. I don't know if you did already, but the word deacons literally just means servant.
Servant, that's all it means.
And something I find so interesting is, how often do we think, like, am I qualified to serve? Like, aren't I qualified to serve just because I'm a Christian? Well, it depends. Like, and this is, I think, why we start to differentiate and really say, like, well, a deacon is generally one we're going to regard as someone who's kind of in a leadership position, but is also a servant, right? That's their primary task, is to serve.
Servant leader.
But they also do it as a leadership position, right? They're an example to others, and so you're going to stand in front of the body. Someone's going to look to you as a leader. Yeah, you need to be qualified, and so.
I mean, everybody can serve. So if
Absolutely.
you take Acts 6, it's the guy that's actually going to direct to make sure everybody is getting fed properly. That would be the deacon position. That deacon might say to me, go hand this plate of food to that lady over there.
Right.
I can serve her.
Anyone can do that.
Anyone can do that. But it's that position of leadership where he's going to direct and guide that area of service. That's where the Bible would call him a deacon.
Right.
Somebody else. So here at the church, we would say, like, within our deacon team, you might have somebody who's heading up the finances.
Right.
And they might be really putting a lot of effort and direction and guidance into, like, making sure the finances are running smoothly. That might be a deacon position.
Yeah.
Whereas the person who's maybe just going and emptying out the offering box, that would just be a regular servant position. So sometimes the lines might be hard to distinguish, but somebody who has some kind of authority to make sure that area of service is functioning well,
Right.
But still under submission to the church leadership as a whole, that would be a deacon position.
Yeah.
So, but appointment of those, right, within the church is also very clear in the Bible. Those are congregationally appointed positions moving forward. Like, so you might have the apostles who are going and just planting churches early on, and then those apostles are commissioned. Okay, we got to find leaders to leave here. But after that, you just see pretty quickly that churches are appointing leaders from within, right? They're raising up and appointing the leader from within, which is pretty common in church history as well, that you see very prevalent and very early on, in a general sense, that people are raised up and appointed from within. Not by, like, high priestly birth, right? So it's not by we bear the
not
same
by your
DNA.
lineage
It's
or
not by
anything like
lineage.
that.
It's by spiritual readiness, according to biblical terms, that you're appointed as a leader.
Yeah, and we would say, right, this is, as we've done a couple ordinations now, including my own, we would firmly say it is God who ordains to ministry, but we as the church are going to come alongside and recognize that and say, yes, Lord, essentially. It's an affirmation of, we believe this person has been called to this ministry because we believe God has ordained them, and so we're simply coming along and saying, okay, yes, they actually meet the qualifications, and let's, we'll affirm that.
Exactly. Not because we did something.
Right.
God did that work in their life. We are affirming the work.
Yeah, exactly.
That's it. And also in that comes with willing submission.
Right.
Not forced. I'm affirming that God has called this person into a position of leadership. And so I will willingly, as long as they meet the biblical qualifications in their own life, I will willingly submit myself to their leadership.
Yeah.
It's the case for husbands and wives, right? It's the case for children and parents, willing submission.
Yeah.
It's the case for my submission to Christ.
Exactly.
It's how the Christian life functions, out of willful surrender, willful submission based on the love that person has for me, and how they're executing their life according to God's word. Yeah. Which Christ always did perfectly.
Exactly.
So,
and we do not.
We do not.
Yeah.
So, but I can willfully submit myself to Him, and my authority comes through the execution of the word, just like with my wife.
Yeah.
She willfully submits herself to me because I do, not perfectly, but I execute the word into my life in relation to her.
Yeah.
So it gives her trust to willfully submit herself to me.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
forced. Yeah, we could go into that long ways, but
Yeah.
forced submission is always bad submission, including within church leaderships.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And then maybe to just put a wrap on all this, we could keep going talking about other stuff, but kind of from like an actual like functional and practical standpoint, how does this actually play out in our church? Well, by the time that you guys will see this video, we'll have already had our annual business meeting for the year, but pretty much every single year we have the congregational voting to approve one of our elders. And so that's always going to be a thing. And in fact, we actually have 2 coming up this year because we're bringing on Eric Picard, Lord willing, as one who is going to be a church planting pastor. So he was already ordained. Now we're just seeking the congregational approval to make him an elder. And then we're also, we have a rotation of elders, of lay elders here at our church. And so for the elder position, at least, we have that congregational approval. For the quote-unquote deacon position, generally that's something that we as elders handle. And of course, if there's an issue there, the congregation is absolutely, in fact, I would say they're obligated to come and bring that to us. But there's kind of an understanding there that just like, if we make a decision to, we're going to pull the trigger on buying some supplies to fix the roof, we're not always seeking congregational approval for every single little detail. It's the congregation is essentially, willfully submitting to our authority to make decisions like that. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, if there's issue with that, they're going to come talk to us. Lord willing, that's what they should do. Yeah. Come talk to us and tell us, and we can talk about it. But there is some understanding of, okay, we're going to let you, do what you need to do, and there are certain things, and some of it is for kind of legal requirement of us being a church, but. That's kind of what we do at our business meeting is we go through and here's our plan for the year, here's our budget for the year, here's our leaders, and we need your approval.
Yep. Yeah, we have, to the best of our ability as a group of elders, identified that these people meet the biblical qualifications, and we're asking you to affirm or deny what we have seen. So we are together as one body doing that. Finances, hey, here's what we would like to see the ministry function and spend this upcoming year, but also taking an assessment of what the previous year looked like. So every cent is accounted for here at the church, and you have the ability, in a Baptist directive, right? You have the ability to look into the budget, we call it a ministry funding plan, and see every single dollar, every cent, where it was spent, how it came in, how it went out, and what it went to. So it's in full open and accountability, and that's the case at any point during the year. You could come and ask and say, hey, what's the financial position look like? And I'd like to see where we are, and you have authority to get that. Right. So there's nothing hidden. There's no backdoor stuff. There's no like, I can't go talk to somebody about this. People feel awkward and don't. And I hear about that. And like, we're an open book. Come and ask us anything, anytime. We're not going to say, no, you're not allowed to know that. You can know anything, all of it. It's completely open. So you don't like how something's functioning at the church, come talk to an elder.
Exactly.
You think that the finances aren't being spent well in some area, come talk to somebody. So that's the case for all areas and aspects of church life, right? If something is not in accordance and honoring to Christ, please bring it to the elder's attention, and as often as you need to, until we, either say, no, we believe it is biblical because X, and because of this, or yes, we are making changes towards that route. Yeah. So that's just how especially this body should function.
And I think that goes back to the understanding that we as elders are not above you in any sense. We've been given by God a position to essentially say, here's the plan, here's where we're going, and to execute that. But we're by no means, above you in any way, shape, or form that you would come to us and say, no, we can't talk to you about this. It's, no, absolutely. Like we're kind of the ones here executing it. And so, if you want to come talk to us, absolutely. We're, our doors always open. Please do. Absolutely.
Please do. There's probably like 1,000 other areas we could touch here, but main directives, right, for being a Baptist church are those 3 things we talked about. So believers' baptism by full submersion, remembrance communion, and local congregational leadership with appointed elders within the church. Those are basically the basic Baptist directives. So if you're in a Baptist church, those are the foundations for what you believe in. Obviously, Christ being our head and the authority of Scripture there. A lot of little details, but those are the 3 main distinguishing factors of separation as a Baptist. And then we function here in a plurality of leaders as elders within the church, and we just had a long discussion of why we believe the Bible says that we should do that, as well as how we execute that here at the church. So I'd love to hear your feedback, what you guys think, or maybe you have a completely different church directive here. Absolutely. We do not think this is a divisive area. We think churches can lead and be led by those who are appointed as well. We see that happening in many. I have Presbyterian brothers who are dear friends of mine. I consider them faithful followers of Christ. So this is not a separation area by any means. I'd be happy to do ministry continually and often with somebody who does not agree or think as I do or believe as I do. Here, this is not a salvation issue. So, but that doesn't mean that we don't have firm beliefs here at this church, and that's why we do what we do. And now you know. Yeah. So, questions or comments or concerns? Absolutely, love to hear about them. And if there's something specific or more direct that you guys want to hear about, shoot us an email or throw a comment. You can always email us at questions@lwcny.org, and we'll try to cover one of those things on a future episode of The Drip. I think that's it.
That's it, yeah.
And you guys give us some feedback here, and we will see you next time on The Drip.
See you guys.
Okay.
See, this is the nice part about sweatshirt season. You don't have to suck in your gut. I mean, you literally don't have to, but...
Good point.
And those of us who are a more well-defined shape.
Doesn't even show up on camera. Let's get this. It's as far as I can go. Hold on.
Push.
This is my winter weight.
Yeah.
Summer weight.
Yeah.
Oh no, it stays out. Winter and summer weight. Oh, we're recording all this time.
Oh yeah.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Why not?